Thank you. I'm very happy to be here, especially under the auspices of the various groups at Dartmouth and the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. Although the topic is about the abstract notion of preemptive warfare, let's be honest, the subtext that will reverberate throughout the evening is Iraq, not Afghanistan, not Mr. Milosevic's departure, not even Noriega in Panama. So I'd like to make a few statements about the idea of preemptive warfare to foster democracy or freedom, and then get to Iraq in particular. I think we have to keep in mind that these concepts that we all find as buzzwords, preemption, multilateralism, are just ethically or morally neutral. They have no moral currency unless you examine the landscape in which they take place. After all, preemption, we all grew up with the idea if you were on the playground and you knew a bully at 5 o'clock was going to beat you to a pulp, I'm pretty sure of it, or he was going to beat your friends, or he was going to disrupt the atmosphere of the lunch cafeteria, you thought you might be able to preempt him, and that was a moral act depending on his nature and yours and whether you were successful. Everybody thinks today it would have been a fine and wonderful thing if we could have stopped Hitler in 1936 before 50 million people. Forgetting the fact that if we had tried that in 1936 and not been successful, German revisionists today would have said that we started World War II. So preemption takes its value depending on whether it's successful and whether it's moral, at least more moral than the alternative. And reasonable people can, of course, disagree. We say multilateralism is good. We didn't get enough allies. Forgetting the fact of whether or not we had a true coalition of the willing, myself, I would prefer to be on the side of the Anglo-Americans like Australia and the United Kingdom, or the Poles, in stopping the fascism of Saddam Hussein and putting an end to the duplicity of China and Russia, who enrich themselves. Rather be with them than the Chinese and Russians. But nevertheless, multilateralism even is a morally neutral concept. I can think of no more multilateral invasion than what Germany did in June of 1941, when everybody from the Finns to the Italians to the Spanish joined in to destroy the Soviet Union. And yet I think that was probably a grave moral error. The Soviet Union was essentially alone. It's not how many people you have on your side, it's the cause, and often, given the nature of man, the majority is often wrong. We should also remember that preemption is not new. The mistake, I think, of elevating this concept into a buzzword was the Pentagon's erroneous notion that A, it was new, and B, they would publicize it in a position paper. Remember that this country started out by attacking the Barbary Coast because we felt that we had to preempt that den of piracy that was interrupting commerce. And since then, in our own lifetime, whether it's Grenada or Panama or Yugoslavia or Afghanistan, preemption is not new, and it's not been new throughout history. During the build-up to the war, there was many critics versed in history who said, we are just like the Athenians who preempted and went to Sicily in 415 and found themselves destroyed and lost 40,000 irreplaceable soldiers that led to the end of the Peloponnesian War in a mere 11 years because of that loss. But we forget that preemption, again, depends on whether you're successful and it's moral. We don't remember that in 369, the Theban general Epaminondas decided that it was not true, that Helots were fit to govern themselves. They were capable of autonomy. And although Sparta was not a direct threat, he thought it was valuable to ensure the peace of Greece to go down and march into Sparta, preempt and establish democratic states of democracy and free the Helots. And he was successful, and he was considered the great man of antiquity for that. So there is a history of preemption throughout world affairs, and these concepts depend on the landscape in which they take place. A third warning I think we should keep in mind is the dangers of utopianism. We are the wealthiest, most affluent, most sophisticated society in the world, and we cannot make the mistake, because we have technological utopia at our fingertips, that we can snap our fingers and everything can be perfect. Because Americans are convinced that they're not perfect doesn't mean they're not good. And this idea that Don Rumsfeld met with Saddam, or we supplied Saddam's arsenal, is ludicrous. 2% of his weapons were supplied by Rumsfeld or whoever was in policy. It went across various administrations because of the simple fact that we were dealing with a theocratic and dangerous Iranian government who was at war with the Iraqis, who'd killed 20,000 of their own people. our ancestor did not suffer the burdens of utopianism to the same degree. After all, when World War II started in 1939 to ensure that Eastern Europe would be free of totalitarianism, it ended ensuring that it would not, with the advent of the Soviet Union, who we sent the equivalent in today's dollars of $100 billion because we thought it was marginally better. This is a country that butchered 30 million of its own people, marginally better than the Hitler Soviets, even though that the GMC trucks, 375,000 we gave to that monstrous regime, helped after the war send people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn to the Gulag. But again, we thought that we were good, not perfect, and we would not suffer the wages of every utopian who's frozen in inaction. This idea of activism with moral right, a preponderance rather than perfection, has a long history in the West. Aristotle, after all, said it's easy for anybody to be moral in their sleep. It's when you try to translate that to the rough and tumble world of reality that the contradictions can freeze people of lesser nerve. And finally, remember, the Cold War is over, so while all of us deplore the backing of people like the Shah or Pinochet, it's easy now to forget that 7,000 nukes were pointed and ready for 15-minute trajectories at us. And so the idea, erroneous in my view, that we backed rightists who promised to keep oil flowing and communists out, forget the consequences. If that was wrong then it's right now to rectify it. And if you look at the United States military in the post-Cold War, there's a rogues gallery who've fallen victim to them. Look at Noriega. Look at Mr. Milosevic. Look at the Taliban. Look at Saddam. Fascist, all of them. And what followed is a genuine consensus to try to foster something better. Turning to Iraq, go read the 1998 letter of the neoconservatives who called for the preemptive attack on Saddam Hussein before 9/11, and ask yourself who signed it and who didn't. Dick Cheney didn't sign it. George Bush didn't sign it. Condoleezza Rice didn't sign it. Colin Powell didn't sign it. They thought it was ludicrous. They were realists. Condoleezza Rice came in criticizing Bill Clinton for his peacekeeping and his interventionism. And who was most affected by that letter? Bill Clinton, because in 1999, without congressional approval, without UN approval, he bombed for 4 days Operation Desert Fox. And why? To take out the WMD, he said. And who praised it? Admiral Zenny, who organized the bombing campaign, the critic of the war today. But something happened that changed die-hard realist into preemptionist, and that was 9/11. There came the idea that after 9/11, the nature of warfare had changed, and that these people from the Middle East, terrorists, had done something that the British in the 19th century, that the Japanese, that the Germans, that the Soviets had never done. They had destroyed the very heart of the American financial system and its iconic representation of military prowess at the Pentagon. And these were stealthy people who came out of the Middle East, and out of that exegesis, a second reason was adduced to look at Iraq. And that was not WMD. The error was the method, not the reason. The Bush administration privileged WMD, but if you look at the Senate proposals that were ratified on October 11, 2002, they didn't say we should go to war because of WMD. They said we should go to war against Saddam for 23 reasons. They have a series of whereas clauses, and you can imagine what they were. That he's attacked 4 of his neighbors, that he broke all of the agreements that followed the 91 peace accords, that he refused to follow UN sanctions, that he was cheating on UN's inspection, that he tried to assassinate a president of the United States, that he practiced genocide against his own people, and he had WMD, and he was firing at the no-fly zone. 13 years, 350,000 sorties, 1 week they don't fly, and Kurds and Shiites are going to be butchered again. That was what the Senate said was the reason to go to war. And who said that? Tom Daschle said that WMD is a real threat. John Kerry said it was growing. Hillary Clinton said we have to do something about it now.